Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Chris Winfield with us. Chris is a contributor for Inc. and host of a show for Entrepreneur Magazine. His writings have also appeared in Business Insider, Time, Buffer, and other top-tier publications. Chris has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NBC's Today Show, USA Today, ABC News, Fast Company, Fox, and Forbes, and many other outlets. Chris has shown clients, including people from companies like Disney, Virgin, Intuit, and so forth, to create high-profile visibility and leverage their connections with the media and influencers for credibility, authority, and profit. Chris, it's so great to have you on the show.
Great to see you. Great to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, so I'd love to start with your origin story. How did you go from SEO, because I've known you forever, decades, and pivot to where you're at now, and what have been some of the lessons and epiphanies along the way?
Yeah, so the first thing, just to be clear, I was never meant to be an entrepreneur or get into SEO or web design or any of that stuff. Like, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, with every single person in my family worked in a school system. And my goal, my only real goal in life, because I wasn't very driven, was to just not work in a school system, because I hated school. I got in trouble in school all the time. And I just wanted to get a job, like a normal job. And out of college, I got a job at a web design startup. And this was right towards the end of the .com days. And Razorfish, if you remember Razorfish, were trading at $6 billion or something. And, the guys who started it all, their whole goal was just to take this company public. And a lot of them were from the stock world. I later found out that one of the guys was the number 6 guy at Stratton Oakmont, which is the Wolf of Wall Street, all this stuff. And none of that really materialized. Not even really, none of that materialized at all. The company ran out of money. They stopped paying me. And I wound up eventually leaving. It wasn't even right away. I wish I could say that as soon as they stopped paying me, I still believed in the dream. But then, one day I was just I've had enough. And I was I don't want to ever rely on somebody else for my paycheck again. So I started a company, web design and SEO company, because they had been charging lots of money for these web designs, $150,000 for just a web design. It was built in Cold Fusion, and you couldn't do nobody was being able to be found even for their names online. So I was all right, I got to figure out a way to get people in. So I started learning everything I could about search engine optimization, which you're an expert at, obviously. And I was doing okay, barely enough, and by okay, I mean, I barely could eat and survive in New York City. And one day I was watching TV, and I was watching CNBC, and I see this guy on there, and I'm oh, wow, I want to buy whatever this guy's selling. And then I'm I want to be that guy. And then I realized that TV and the media had that effect, where you see somebody there and all of a sudden something changes in your mind, and that branding and that trust, that authority. So I was all right, what if I could do this for myself? So even back then, this is the way that I was going to differentiate myself, was through media. So I started to learn the way I learned everything about SEO that I could. I started to learn everything that I could about media. And I got in a New York Times article, mentioned my company. I was so proud. I put that on every, my website as seen in New York Times, blah, 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 all these different things. And then the next year I got in the USA Today article, and that USA Today article led to me getting what at the time was my first multi-million-dollar client, a division of Virgin. And so the interesting thing was I always believed in media, and I always two things that grew my companies, media and speaking. That's how we know each other, from speaking at different places, and referrals that would come out of that. And so that's kind of where my road led, through a lot of ups and downs, but to this whole thing around teaching people how to get in the media and how to leverage that.
Yeah. Do you remember the person that was on CNBC that you're enamored by, or just
No
completely
clue.
sold by?
No
Okay.
clue. I wish I did. I was trying to think of it one day, but I'm like, I don't even remember that at all.
Okay. Yeah. 'Cause, funny you mentioned the Wolf of Wall Street a little earlier, because I was on his podcast, the real Wolf of Wall Street, not
Jordan, yeah.
the yeah, Jordan Belfort,
Yeah, yeah.
not the movie. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was really it was a cool interview, and I just he's got a lot of energy, and he's really smart. Just like I found him to be quite different from the portrayal on in the movie. So,
Yeah.
anyways,
He's down there in Miami with you now too.
is he okay? Because
Yeah, he just moved there.
yeah, I had to drive to his location in LA. I was in LA at the time, so it wasn't a big deal. But
Yeah.
yeah, he did all his podcast interviews in person.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about some of the practical applications of developing this celebrity status by being on TV and getting media coverage. Like, what are some of the direct benefits that our listener would expect to receive, and maybe give a few examples of things that you've gotten in your personal experience?
Yeah. So for me, when I started, like I had, as I mentioned, no money, really no connections, because like I hadn't networked when I was at that job, and I went to like a school in upstate New York, and I hardly was there, and all these different things. So I had no money, no connections, and then there was like a million zillion other web design companies, search engine optimization companies, as you know, out there. And so what I was thinking about, and why I really wanted to leverage the media back then, so this is like 2002, 2003, was because I wanted to stand out from everyone else. So if you think about it, if you're looking at two different people, so two different consultants, let's say two different SEO consultants, and you go and there's person A, and you look person A up online, and they have their website, and they have some testimonials and stuff like that, but nothing else. Then you go to person B, and person B, you see all these different news clippings come up for them. You see that they've been featured on CNBC. You see that they've been on Good Morning America. They've been on all these different things. You are going to pick person B. Like, if all other things are the same, you're going to pick person B, because they have that trust. They're that recognized expert from the media. So like, that's one of the things that is still so unbelievably powerful. So like, people thinking about it, bringing it up to today, there's so much, like, it's easy to get lots of followers on social media, or, all these different things, but it's not as easy to get verified. What does it take to get verified? Well, most of the time it takes being in the news. So it takes that you're a noteworthy person. So, and that's the way that they can judge that. So those, like, when you're thinking about it from that perspective, like, that is so unbelievably powerful. Because then the other thing is, and you see this all the time with like people's landing pages or their ads, where it'll show like the Forbes logo and said like, as seen in Forbes, or like it'll have something that, the writer called it like the most innovative product of 2022. And what happens when somebody's looking at that ad, or when they see that on that landing page, something happens. It's much more different than if the company at themselves had said, we have the most innovative product of 2022. All right, of course you're going to say that. But then, with the inherent, even with all the craziness like around the media, but there's still that inherent trust and inherent authority that comes along with that. That stands out. That helps to inform a buying decision. It helps to inform, more trust and more authority. And, also if it's just a person, it's like, helps to become that recognized expert.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a huge credibility booster. It's a way to provide your prospect with social proof, because then they don't have to do so much due diligence on you. If the New York Times thinks you're awesome, then you're probably pretty awesome. So
exactly. Oh no, I just want to give you one of my favorite examples of a friend of both of ours. So Neil Patel. So
Yep.
Neil, in many respects, is one of the best marketers out there, and it's definitely when it comes to direct response, when it comes to just being very smart with how he does things. Now, if you go to neilpatel.com and you look at Neil's bio, in the first, I think it's it's approximately 4 lines long. In the first 2 lines, he mentions 4 different publications. He mentions New York Times, he mentions Wall Street Journal, he mentions Forbes, and I think he mentions Entrepreneur Magazine. Now, why does Neil Patel, who, somebody who invests so much in ads and so much in, content and everything like that, why is he doing that? Because he knows that if somebody hasn't heard of him, which, there's a lot of people, that they are going to have heard of those different places and they're going to think differently of him.
Yeah. 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 So Neil, by the way, was on this podcast a couple times. So we'll include links in the show notes to those episodes. So what's the difference between writing for an outlet, let's say Forbes or Entrepreneur, and being covered in there as a source or a subject matter expert? There's a big difference in my view, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, sure. So the way that I look at writing or being a contributor, there's a lot of things around that. So it's really around like building up your credibility and showing that you have a body of work around being a subject matter expert. So for example, when I was started a new business around productivity and personal development, I wasn't known for either of those things. And I had to do things to get known for them and to build up my expertise. So one of the things that I, invested heavily in terms of my time into was writing for all these different places, and not doing the easy thing, which would have been writing about marketing, writing about SEO, all these things that I had already done. Now, on top of that, also getting ancillary coverage, so other coverage from people to write about me. But I think it shows the authority, shows the subject matter expert when you are that contributor, and when you can consistently, like you know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like that somebody can go and see, and it also becomes an great thing for prospecting. It becomes a great thing for closing sales. I also found it to be a great thing for building my list, because I could always answer. I'd have somebody answer a question. Like I'd get so many questions. I'd just be like, hey, check out this article I wrote on, Inc. on this subject. Now that does a whole bunch of cool things to somebody in terms of moving them, faster into your orbit, into your trust, because they're like, wow, all right, he answered my question and he's a writer for Inc. and he actually knows what he's talking about here.
Right.
So what's your take?
Yeah. So my thought about this is, if you're contributing on an ongoing basis, let's say a columnist, that gives you a certain air of expertise and authority, maybe not as much celebrity status, but certainly authority and just being a go-to person on the topic. If you're a one-off contributor, that might be a fluke. It might be calling in a favor with somebody or something, right? So it's not as big of a deal. Being a subject matter expert that is referenced in somebody else's article gives you the ability not just to mention as seen on and whatever the publication is, but to actually quote from the article itself, which you wouldn't be able to do in the case where you're the contributor of the piece of content. So if the New York Times said, Chris Winfield, best guy since sliced bread or something like that, I could use that if I'm you. Yep. I could use that on the website and credit that to the New York Times. So those are some of the things that come to my mind off the top of my head. So
yeah,
anything else that we're missing?
One of the other things, just for people, there's also a great connection building as a contributor, as somebody you're meeting lots and lots of different people, and it's like same thing like with a podcast. Like it's a great way to go deeper with connections. It's a great way to, network. So, it's very similar in that regard. If you're somebody who's going to be looking to interview people, looking to get quotes, and, which I would recommend.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have been able to have interviews, powerful conversations with folks who have a very full schedule, who would never take a call or an email even from the CEO of an SEO company or whatever. But because I have a podcast with all these big name guests that I've had on, like Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey and Seth Godin and Jay Abraham, Dan Kennedy, and like I can name drop some big names depending on what the topic is, whether it's health or business or SEO or whatever, right? So that's really cool. And one thing that I would love to hear from you is if you're actually focused on TV and you have a fear of being on TV, like no problem getting in front of a camera for a YouTube video or for a podcast episode, whether you're the guest or you're the interviewer. But some people are pretty terrified about being on TV, especially if it's live. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. So a couple of things how we help people with this. So with our agency, so my partner, Jen Gottlieb, who's also my fiance in real life, or in real life, outside of work, she's also my partner. Thank you. So she, her title in our company, so she's co-founder and CMO, Chief Mindset Officer, because what we found is that it doesn't matter who it is, like everyone struggles with a lot of the same things. She used to be a host on a VH1 show where they interviewed like the top like rock stars in the world. And she said the main question that they would ask her when they got done with the interview was that good enough? So, here's people that are making, millions, hundreds of millions, like, everyone playing out in front of these huge, however many thousands of people in concerts, and like still worried about like, oh, did I come off good enough? So here's a couple of ways that we help people with this. So one, and I actually just posted about this today, but is the idea of you have a responsibility. So you have a responsibility to get your message out there into the world, whatever way that is. And, for many people, the way that they're going to find you is through TV. So let me give you an example of this. We had this one client, doctor, very, very successful doctor. She had a practice. She had a company, a product company. She was also a mother of 6 adopted kids. Like this is like a superwoman. But she also had a deathly fear of being on TV. So she had come to one of our events because she kept hearing about us, and she started working with us. And I remember when we first got her booked, she on TV the first time, she literally made herself sick, got, into her mind so much that she called out and said, I can't do this interview, and had to cancel the interview, all of this. So finally, through working with her, getting her to really just understand, all right, listen, it's not about you, the blah, blah, blah. She started to do interviews. And she said the one day that all completely changed for her was she got a message from a mother. So this woman had, the doctor had went on TV talking about how different foods affect the brain. And she got a message from this mother. And the mother said, I have a suicidal teen. She's tried to kill herself multiple times. Can I bring what you said? Just, I'd never heard anyone talk about that. Can I bring her in to see you? Now, she literally saved this girl's life. The girl's not suicidal anymore. She's thriving in school. She said right then it really hit her. It's not about me. It's not about my fear, my this, whatever. It's about my responsibility to get my message out there. The way that we make this really easy for people to remember, and I think about this all the time, is 4 letters, HOPE. So help one person every day. So if I get up and I go to speak at somewhere, let's say I get on stage and I'm like, okay, I got to make sure every single person in here loves me and that they all get they all leave thinking, it's not going to work. There's going to be somebody who hates me. There's going to be this. But if I think about, all right, I just need to help one person. So one person out there needs my message. So then you take that same exact idea, so same exact thing to TV, and you don't make it about you. You make it about the person that you're going to help. Now, the cool thing about this is like then tying this in with your responsibility, because if you don't, then they're going to go and they're going to buy or they're going to do something with somebody who's not as good as you, who doesn't care as much, and who's not going to be able to get them the results that you can. So it's your responsibility. So now when we flip it around like that and make people realize like, wow, all right, it doesn't matter. Like I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to try to be like, some talking head. I can just be myself, get on there, share my experience, share my hope, and, share my message. Boom, that changes the game.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. That's not too dissimilar from a concept that, I apply in my life. I love this idea of hope, help one person every day, and just show up with that intention. My intention in everything I do, and I have to keep reminding myself because I'll forget. I'll just go into autopilot, just like all of us. But the intention for me is to reveal light. So to reveal light in this podcast interview, to reveal light when I get on stage to give a speech, when I go on TV, when I am interviewed on someone else's podcast, when I'm meeting one-on-one with a client or meeting with a prospect. Like, how am I going to reveal light? And usually, or at least just have that intention to reveal light, and the how usually just shows up. I
love that. That's my takeaway for the day, the entire day. I'm reveal light. It's very, very simple. I'm going to remember that. A mentor of mine once told me, I was getting ready to go speak to all these finance guys and, a couple of billionaires in that room. And it was something I just started speaking about, and I was really, really nervous. And this mentor of mine told me something that I always say as well. And he said, here's what I want you to say right before you go in. God, speak to me and through me. Very, very simple. So it's the same thing with like revealing light. I love that so much.
Yeah, I learned about revealing light and that concept and all the how-to of it from Kabbalah classes. Yeah, love it. So
got it.
Okay, now let's talk a bit about your events. You mentioned that you're doing these events. This woman was one of your students, and she made herself sick, and then you helped her get through that. But what goes on in these events? Is this media training? Is it getting them to put a perfect pitch together that they can put in front of TV producers? Is it they're actually rehearsing getting their pitches in front of the TV producers? Is it all the above? Like, how does this all work?
All right. So there's two different sides. So one side, and where this company grew out of, was something called Unfair Advantage Live. Is a event that we do here in New York City. And literally, this is where this all came from. So I was in this small mastermind, still am. Is called the Dad Mastermind. It's myself, a guy named Jonathan Fields, who you probably know through the podcasting world.
Yep, he's been on my other show. Yep.
Yeah, cool. He's very, very successful podcast called The Good Life Project. A guy named Todd Herman, who wrote a book called The Alter Ego Effect, one of the best performance coaches in the world, and a guy named Ryan Lee, who has a supplement company called Rewind. And anyway, we would meet once a month, and we're all dads and we're all entrepreneurs. And one of the best things about surrounding yourself with people that can see things that you can't when you surround yourself with the right people. So they looked at me one day, and I was doing this company. It was a personal development and productivity company. It was doing well. But I didn't absolutely love what I was doing. It was just something that I had gotten really passionate about. And I was like, all right, I'm going to build a business around this. They looked at me one day and they said, Chris, why are you not teaching people what you know best? And I was like, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, anytime that we describe you to people, we call you our unfair advantage. I was like, well, what does that mean? They said, well, you could take out your phone, you could text somebody and to get media, to get a book agent, to, anything in 30 seconds. And it would take us 6 months. And I was like, that's really interesting. And it was all around like just relationships and connections and everything like that. And really the part that Todd keyed in on was around the media part. And besides, I'd been doing some of that as well with people, helping them. And I realized that it's like one of those things where if you're too close to it, like you just figure everyone's good at it. Everyone knows how to create those connections. Everyone knows how to message for, write a pitch or whatever.
It's a real skill, and it's a real gift, and you have it. And yeah, it's like what's the expression? I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. So you need to be told like this is an unusual advantage. Yeah, and I think it was Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point called those people connectors, right? Connectors, mavens, and salespeople. Those are the three types.
Yeah, exactly. Todd and I'd helped him a lot with an event that he had without expecting anything in return.
Yep. 90-day year. Is that the
yeah, exactly.
Yep,
exactly.
In fact, you spoke at the one that I attended a few years ago.
Yeah. So I'd helped him with that one, getting lots of people in there, all this stuff, speaking. So he's like, I got to repay you. Let's do this event together, Unfair Advantage Live. So he had this, he had a mastermind that met on a Monday and a Wednesday. So they would come in once a quarter. So he said, like, let's do it on the Tuesday. And he's like, I'll promote it to my list. I got other people to promote it. And, it sold out. And right from the beginning, it was, fairly, premium priced event. Like the one day was like $3,500 or something like that. And I was doing this without like thinking, all right, there's a business behind this or anything. I was like, all right, I'm just following the flow of life here. So did this, taught people just like the basics, also brought in, experts, and then at night brought together all kinds of different people from the media so that they could actually make connections, and crazy things happened from there. Like, connection, people got in the media, all these things. Everyone kept saying, what can I buy from you? I was like, there's nothing to buy. So I decided to do another one that was 2 days. And at that one, people kept saying like, what can I buy? And I was like, I'll do a VIP day with you. So then eventually, after the third one, before the third one, I realized, all right, there's something here. I really, people keep asking, one of the things that if you listen to customers, they'll tell you what they need. So I created a program around this. I hired somebody, Jen's best friend. I poached her away from one of the big PR agencies. She still runs our agency to this day. Then eventually that summer, Jen and I, said, all right, let's get together. We're going to create the agency, this whole company around it. That became Super Connector Media. Now up until 2019, like about 80% of our revenue came from live events. So either the 3 live events that we did that year, or speaking at like about 50 other, on 50 other stages. So then 2020, this thing called coronavirus comes. And, we have our event scheduled for like May of 2020 in New York City. So May of 2020 in New York City is not happening anywhere. So like we had to think about, all right, what are we going to do to change that? Because that's obviously a significant hit. So what we did was we created this boot camp. At the time, it was called the Be on TV Challenge. It's now the Be on TV Boot Camp. You can check it out, Be on TV Bootcamp /Stephan for more, for really getting into it, because there's some cool things on your page. So
and that's my affiliate link too. So I'll get ka-ching if you buy.
The beontv bootcamp.com/Stephan. Don't forget, it's with an A. All right. So, so what we did was we started to think about, all right, what do people really like when they come to us? Like, what's one of the main things that they want from us? And so we listed all these things, talked to a lot of different people, customers, et cetera. And then one of the main things that people want is they want to be on TV. Like that's like a goal for a lot of people. It's, there's a higher perceived barrier to entry than like, getting in a online publication or, something like that. So what we did was we just sat down and we're like, all right, if we had 5 days and, 5 hours to teach this to somebody, what would we do? So the first day deals with mindset. The second day deals with getting clear. The third day gets clear on your own messaging, like the third day alone it blows people's minds. The fourth day, then giving them an actual pitch, like pitches that we use for our agency, like plug and play, like Mad Libs. And then the fifth day, how to bring it all together and use your network to get booked. And from the beginning, the results were just out of control. So like people were getting on TV before it was even over. There was like this one doctor I remember, like on the fifth day, she was like, I was on TV yesterday. I'm like, we're not even done yet. In a cool story, this one guy, Dr. Stephan Lovegrove, the previous year he had paid a PR agency about $60,000, and his only dream was he wanted to be on TV. Like he knew he could be an amazing media personality. It could help him grow his business. He was a life coach, still is. And the $60,000 he pays to this agency, they get him nothing. At the end of the year, they're like, all right, you're the problem. You're going to have to change if we're going to continue to work together. You're going to have to change how you show up. We can't book you because it's on you. Now, what we always say is the opposite. Like we say, be the most you can be. Like, don't try to be like anyone else. So anyway, he was like broken. He heard about our boot camp through somebody, like through Scott Oldford or somebody, and wound up going through it. Didn't say a word the entire time. Got booked on his hometown. Then the next weekend, he got booked on CNN. Then like in that first year alone, he got booked on like 250 different media, TV appearances, including his dream to be on Hallmark, Home and Family, became a recurring guest on there. He just did his own event where it became his own media event. He had over 1 billion impressions. Like it was covered by every single outlet you can imagine. And he's known as America's life coach, and like that trends, and like it's just wild. So that's the boot camp, and like the way, and we do it all virtually. It's all done right through Zoom and Facebook and all this, and it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So there's this concept I learned from James Schramko. He's one of my coaches, and he calls it something like the mediocre or mildly impressive case study. So if somebody hears a case study where this person went from nowhere to like billionaire, nowhere to being on Good Morning America, then the listener or the viewer oftentimes thinks, oh, well, good for them. That's not me though. I could never do that. Mildly impressive or just kind of mediocre case study sounds like, oh, they got 30% increase in sales. I could probably do that too. Like, what were the techniques that person used, right? So do you have a less amazing, more relatable case study than this guy who completely knocked it out of the park and now is America's life coach?
Yeah. Let me share a completely different way. So one of the things is that we always say that we're a PR agency, but we're really secretly a personal development company. We just use media as the gateway. So let me give you a different example. So there was this woman, Brenda, and Brenda she had been in the Army, and she'd been sexually assaulted in the Army. And she also was a Black woman, and she started to have major PTSD during everything that had gone on with George Floyd. And at the same time, her husband also asked her to divorce after 20 plus years. And Brenda was literally ready to end her life. She called the suicide hotline. And she talked to a guy on the suicide hotline, and he convinced her. And the thing that he convinced her to stick around with was just look for something tomorrow that piques your interest and just do it, regardless of what it is. Just jump into it. So she's like, all right, I'll give it one day. She gets an email from somebody who had been through our program, this guy named Neil Gordon. And she clicks through to the links, and she sees me and Jen on the pages, and she's like, oh my God, these two happy people, I hate them. Like, but I'm signing up anyway. This is something for me. She's like, I don't even want to be on TV. I don't care. Like, but it's something for me to do. So she shows up on the first day. And she she said she talks about this all the time now. She had her camera on because we always want people to have their camera on, but she's like, I didn't have my hair done, anything. Like, I just hey, they get on, they're so shiny and happy and blah, blah. And she's like, I wanted to hate them, but something kept me listening. And we had this great exercise that we had people do on that first day. And she did it, for whatever reason, she actually did it. A lot of times people won't do stuff, they don't follow through. She did. And this is an exercise that helps people realize how absolutely amazing and how powerful they are and look at their accomplishments. And for whatever reason, that just completely changed her life. So she started bawling. She said she was in her driveway reading this. And what we would always ask people to do is go on Facebook Live, talk about this. So she goes on live on her actual on her actual page. I think it was maybe the first time she had gone live, and for a lot of people that come through and do the boot camp, that's actually quite normal, where they've never even pressed go live on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. So she goes live and, she's bawling and, just because she feels like she got her life back, because she realized how much of a badass she was. And so here's where this is where it always gets interesting, because it's not about just that one person. So that's amazing. Yes, with her. But what happened was she gets a message the next day from a woman who said, I wanted to thank you because this morning, for the first time in 4 years, I got up and made my kids breakfast. She said, you see, 4 years ago, my son committed suicide and I haven't been able to get out of bed. She said, I saw your Facebook Live and it completely changed how I was thinking. It made me stop, pitying myself. It made me get up and, my kids, I want to thank you because my kids have their mom back. Now, when I first heard that, when she shared that at the end of that first boot camp, that just that blew me away. And I won't even go tell you all the things that she's gone on to be able to do, because just from that jumping off point. But, that's also the stuff that happens because one of our core values, our company is called Super Connector Media, is connection. And, right now, especially more than ever, people need connection. People need safe spaces where they're able to connect, where they're able to be themselves, where they're able to express their gifts. And, that's what we also provide.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story. Thank you for sharing it. One thing that comes to my mind as you're recalling everything that happened with Brenda is that when you're in service to others, instead of focusing on yourself, that's when you can break out of the depression or suicidal thoughts, because you're focused on others, and it's really hard to be self-absorbed when you're focused on others. And sounds like that really catapulted her into that service mode, what you did for her.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. And it's so interesting too, because that's one of the things that we talk about in terms of entrepreneurs especially are so bad at asking for help, but they love being of service and love helping people. And, the reframe on asking for help is don't deprive other people of that gift. So if it's somebody that, cares about you in some way, ask them for help, be able to do that. And it's a great reframe.
Yeah. And when you're not showing up powerfully, people are dying, and that could be literal. In your case, if you had taken a different track and not showed up powerfully, not taken the risks that you took, and gotten back on the horse time and time again, you didn't have Super Connector Media and you didn't have your boot camps, Brenda's life may have ended, right? Because it wouldn't have been your essentially intervention for her. And you mentioned Jonathan Fields earlier. He's in your dad mastermind. Something he shared that was really profound and really raw and vulnerable of him to share. He talked about how he was suicidal. I don't know if you know this story or not, but the tinnitus, the ringing in his ears, was getting to him so badly that he wanted to end his life. And whatever he tried, he couldn't get rid of it. It just, in fact, to this day, I believe he still has it. So what happened, though, was he tried, one of the many things he tried was mindfulness meditation. And through that, that was the gateway. The tinnitus was the gateway to a big spiritual awakening and opening for him. That he quotes Joseph Campbell, and let me see if I can grab this quote real quick. Joseph Campbell said, "It is by going down into the abyss that we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure. The very cave you are afraid to enter turns out to be the source of what you are looking for. The damned thing in the cave that was so dreaded has become the center. You find the jewel, and it draws you off." It's really beautiful. So tinnitus for him was the jewel. It didn't look that way when he first experienced it. It got him to the brink, almost to the point of taking his own life, but he didn't. And beautiful things have happened because of tinnitus and in his experience, and how he's shared mindfulness and these kinds of epiphanies that he's received with his audience.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, were you aware of that story?
Yeah. It's it's one of the things that we always say is your message. The things that we think are, so if anyone knew about this, they would think so much less of me, or, whatever, those are usually the things that people identify with, that people can relate to.
Yeah.
And, that's a great example of that.
Yeah. There are stories that come to my mind too of what things that I would be unwilling to share, it would make me uncomfortable to share, but then I loosened up and became more vulnerable and found that it was really helpful. And one of those stories for me is the time when I landed my first 2 big clients was where I put myself out there and I embarrassed myself essentially let me just briefly share what happened, and then you tell me if that's something that I should have hidden or not. Because I never spoke about it for 20 years. And then in the last few years, I decided, you know what, this is actually, there's some good lessons in this. The way I got my first 2 big clients was by talking my way into a conference back in 1995 called How to Market on the Internet. And the speakers were really big name people like GM O'Connell, founder of Modem Media. And I was a lowly volunteer. They gave me the job of mic runner. And I remember it was a panel. GM was one of the speakers on the panel and a few other big name folks. And I was this cheeky 24-year-old at the time. And I had the mic. And I'm running around and I'm decided, I can actually chime in and help answer these questions, which I did. And I didn't know that was inappropriate. I was just a, cheeky 24-year-old who thought that I was adding value. And I got a huge stack of business cards from doing that. And 2 of those ended up being worth $500,000 in customer lifetime value each. So that was $1 million. From me putting myself out there. And I was also de-invited from day 2 of the conference by the conference organizer. The speakers were so pissed at me. Yeah.
Oh my God. I love that story. I think that there's nothing to be embarrassed about with that. I think that's like how so many great, company stories, origin stories start from. So I love it.
Oh my goodness. I was so mortified. I had no idea this was coming. When I was de-invited by the conference organizer, I was devastated. I felt humiliated. I mean, it was just, it was a huge ego hit. And yet what a gift. Like all of it was a gift.
Yeah.
Even being de-invited was a gift, because that gave me perspective, and it gave me the ability to tell a story where, sometimes you put yourself out there and you get smacked, but you do it anyways because it serves the greater good. It serves your higher purpose and mission. And ironically, the same conference organization that put that event on contacted me a few months after and invited me to speak at how to market educational programs on the internet. And I chaired that conference. It was a smaller event, much smaller event, but I chaired that. I did a general session, so I spoke, and I did a workshop, a post-conference workshop. So I was like a big headliner for that particular conference. And clearly the two conference organizers didn't speak to each other, because they told him like, oh no, don't get this guy. He was
don't get that guy. Yeah, exactly.
Had to de-invite that guy. Great. So that was a fun little I don't know if it was coincidence, isn't maybe the right term, more of a synchronicity that happened, that it was the same exact conference organization. It was kind of like a thumbs up from the universe saying, it's all good. You
keep going.
You did good.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, just put yourself out there, take risks. So yeah, kind of gets back to one of your original points of how you got started making a big splash was through media and through speaking. And actually speaking was how we ended up meeting. And I'll tell you, I was a terrible speaker, terrible. When I chaired that event, that was one of my first speaking gigs. And I was terrible at speaking, and I was even worse at chairing, because chairing, you have to be really on it, like great transitions, keep track of time, keep people's energy up. That I was a terrible chair person, and also a really bad speaker. But it galvanized me to just keep at it. And one funny thing that happens when you're a speaker for one big organization, in this case it was IQPC, all the other competitor organizations start poaching you as a speaker for their event. So I got calls from IIR, from all these different organizations, and I just said yes to everything because I knew I had to keep at it until I was really good.
Yep.
Because I was going to suck if I just gave up. I have to keep going. If you're going through hell,
steel sharpens steel. Keep going. Keep going. Exactly. I love that.
Yeah. So do you have any crazy stories like that of I don't know.
I mean, I have a million different ones wherever you want to go. For me, the one that you're definitely familiar with, we had this company, Blue Glass, that I was a co-founder of, and bunch of other companies, and it looked really great on the outside and it was a mess on the inside, and spectacular failure. And and I put so much money into that and time, and also you talk about ego, really defined myself around that. And when that failed, one of the things, this amazing thing happened to me. I was on a call. It was like a Saturday, late afternoon, and I'm on this call, and I forget who I was talking to. It was something about this, and trying to figure shit out, and blah blah blah. And it was like the most important call in the world. And again, like if you gave me $10 million right now, I couldn't tell you who I was talking to or what I was talking about. It's like, which is such a great reminder about how things like that aren't as important as they seem. And I was very disconnected, from people, and like I, really like more focused, like behind my computer, and just not feeling connected at all, and it was obvious. And my daughter, who's the most important person in the world to me, and she was 3 at the time. Her name is Vivian. So I'm talking on the phone. She walks down. And we were living in Tampa, Florida at that time. We had an office down there. And she walks in and she's like, "Daddy, I'm hungry. And I don't know how well she said it, but I'm like, all right, just 1 minute." And she's like, all right. She knew like that 1 minute, it was really more like 5 or 20 minutes. So she says it to me again. She's like, Daddy, I'm hungry. And I was like, 1 minute, 1 minute. And so she's like, all right. So she goes over to the refrigerator. She like opens it up. She grabs a piece of pizza that was like on one of the lower shelves. And she looks at me again, like, are you going to let this happen? Like, you're going to just be okay with this? And I'm like, very engrossed in the call, but like now, like halfway, just paying attention to her. So she goes over, gets a chair, pushes it up to like the counter, gets a plate out, moves it over, pushes it up to where the microwave is. And she like starts hitting a bunch of buttons, like puts the pizza in there. And she's literally like cooking her own dinner. And, she's 3. And I, for whatever reason, probably, 100 things like that had probably happened in my life, up until that time with her. But for whatever reason, at that moment, that just hit me because I was like, all right, if this is the most important person in the world to me, and she feels like she can't count on me, she feels like she's not connected to me. Like, how am I showing up in life? I literally hung up that phone call, like in the middle of it. And I just sat down. I was like, all right, there has to be I have to change everything about how I do things. And, so one obviously was, around my relationship with her. And, we have such an unbelievable relationship now. But the other was just that I started, like, I had like nothing at that point. And, I was getting all these different like offers of, different things to get involved with. And I was like, I don't want any of this. Like, I just want to learn again I want to just connect with people. I want to be of service. You talked about getting outside of yourself. When you're in your worst time, being of service is the easiest way to do that, the most effective way to do that. So I started this experiment where I promised to myself, I'm going to meet one person every single day, so whether that was a meeting in person or a phone call if it had to be, or, Skype. I don't even know if Zoom was around at the time, but so there was 3 rules. So meet one person every day, be open, honest, and vulnerable with them. So like, don't, like, up until that point, like I never would have said like I was, scared about this, or, didn't know how to do that, or, whatever. My ego was, always in the way. Your ego is not your amigo. So and then the third thing was just figure out how I could help that person. So without even asking them, just like figure out what I could do to help that person. So I started doing this, and, I did it every single day. I think for like 727 days, I don't even know, something crazy. And, I met with like people like, Arthur Sulzberger owns the New York Times, or, James Tisch, like, who owns like Lowe's Hotel, like but I also met with people that had nothing, and like everyone in between. And, and that literally like started to change my life. It started like all these opportunities started to pop up because of the law of reciprocity. I didn't even know about this. Like, if you're putting it out there, it's going to come back to you in some way. And like my favorite quote of all time is the Steve Jobs quote: "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards." So I didn't know, that all these things like that were going to happen. And I didn't know that now, like I, would be known as a super connector. I have a company called Super Connector Media, doing all this, but it all started, from there. It started from being at that spot where I was just like, I don't know, like I'm so disconnected. I have nothing. Like, let me just be of service to people. Let me just be curious about people. Let me just be open, honest, and vulnerable with people and see what happens.
That's great. Now, you mentioned Steve Jobs. Do you know Steve Jobs' favorite book? He gave it to everybody that came to visit him. You know what it was? What that book is?
No.
Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda. Have you heard of this book?
Yes, I have heard of it. So it's funny because I'm not a huge Steve Jobs like fan or anything, and like I just love the quote so much. It's from a 2008 commencement speech at Stanford, but I have heard of that book. Have you read it?
I've read bits of it, and I intend to read it, but I have also learned a bit about Yogananda from visiting his self-realization center in the LA area, and also watching the Netflix documentary. I think it's called Awake, It's really good. So I'll include these in the show notes. But
please do.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what's in that book about like Babaji, for example, somebody you'll learn about in the book if you read it, autobiography of a yogi. Anyway, so that's what popped into my mind when you were mentioning Steve Jobs. And another thing that popped into my mind when you were talking about your 3-year-old interrupting your all-important interview or meeting or whatever that was happening on Skype, that reminded me of the infamous BBC interview of Professor Robert Kelly getting interrupted by his 2 children and then the babysitter running after them. It's
I love that. And
hilarious.
See, here's the amazing thing about that. Like, where people are so worried about something like that happening, but that humanized him. That, you know, he's more known for that than anything else ever in his life.
Well, he would have done much better to have welcomed that child with open arms rather than pushing the child away. And so he did get a lot of bad PR for a while because of that. But then he was kind of just, I don't know, an example to put out there of like, media interviews gone wrong. But
exactly.
Yeah, if everything that you do, going back to something I said earlier, is focused around revealing light, then getting interrupted by your child during an all-important media interview on Zoom or whatever is not going to lead to the bad example of Professor Kelly. It's going to be like, okay, come here, honey. You know, we're live in front of millions of people, but
exactly.
Like you're gonna operate from a place of open-heartedness and loving kindness. And so I think that's kind of the moral of the story for pretty much everything that you do.
That's it.
Yeah. Now I know we're out of time, but if our listener or viewer is interested in taking the boot camp on how to be on TV, again, where do they go? And also, if they're interested in using your agency's services or just following you on social and learning from the stuff that you put out there, where should they go?
Yeah. So for the boot camp, here's what I would recommend doing. Go here right now. Don't delay. Don't put it off. TheBeyondTVBootcamp.com/Stephan. And don't forget, Stephan with an A. So TheBeyondTVBootcamp.com/Stephan. And if you want to connect with me, I'm at Chris Winfield on just about every social platform. And I would love to connect and meet Stephan's audience and community.
Awesome. And Super Connector Media, where do they go to learn more about your agency?
Superconnectormedia.com or same thing, Super Connector Media on pretty much all social.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, listener.
Thank you.
This is inspiring and vulnerable and raw and just good stuff. So be like that in the world, and we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.